If you're ready to find your path to success or take the success you're enjoying to the next level, stay tuned. Successful Living with Bill Knapik is on right now.
Welcome to the show, Successful Living with Bill Knapik. That's me. And today, Successful Living with author and master communicator Tim Pollard. His recent book is called Mastering the Moment, Perfecting the Skills and Process of Exceptional Presentation Delivery. In addition, the book, The Compelling Communicator, has been on the show before. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Bill. It's a pleasure to be back.
Super awesome. And by the way, your new book, Mastering the Moment, I'm in the middle of that book. It's incredible. And by the way, I've also talked about your previous book, The Compelling Communicator, many times since we've talked, a year and a half ago. So let's tell people about your company and about this new book.
The two books is perhaps the place to start. So all great communication is about two fundamentally enormous pillars. One is message design. How do you structure a message? And I'm not talking here about what most people think I'd be talking about, like slide design. I'm talking far more fundamentally. How do you structure an argument such that it will just more deeply penetrate the brain of an audience? And that is a particularly interesting question, because the key to communication is understanding how the brain consumes information. And then what great communicators need to learn how to do is to build an argument that aligns with the way the brain processes information. So it's all about anchoring messaging in an audience or a customer problem, structuring an argument around big ideas, because the brain loves ideas, whereas it hates data, organizing it into a logical, sequential narrative, correctly engaging both the left and right brain. What I mean by that is left brain is largely engaged by facts and data, but the right brain is largely engaged by story, imagery, metaphor. So the first book was about that. How do you construct a message, a piece of communication that would just really go straight to the heart of the brain, if you like that. And that is great for TED Talks, for corporate communications, presentations, particularly incredibly effective for sales messaging. If you're trying to build a sales pitch, you've got to know how to do that right. Now, that left, and I knew it did, a gap, if you like, which I sometimes call the delivery dilemma, which is it's fantastic, and it's probably 80% of getting the job right is to build great messaging. But the 20% then, or this key final piece, I don't know what the right number is that presentation the one that shows up on game day? And so the second book, Mastering the Moment, is about presentational message delivery. Have you ever been going to present and you stand up and your technology fails? Or you're not properly rehearsed, so the language that you had planned to use that was, you hoped was exquisitely precise comes out stumbling and clunky. Or the conversation in the room, the audience kind of gets a little rowdy and then gets a little out of hand, and you get completely dragged off topic into the briar patch. Or to get really deep, maybe you stood up and you were not personally sufficiently convincing or authoritative or credible or believable. So there are these really, really interesting topics that I just described that are about taking that great design and making sure you execute it properly on game day. And so the books are very much two of a pair: message design, message delivery. There's really not much point learning about presentation delivery if you don't know about design, but if you do know about design, then delivery is extremely important on the day. So that's how they fit together, and then our company is essentially a communications consulting firm. We do a lot of work in sales messaging for business-to-business companies, especially technical and technological companies, but also we do TED speaker coaching and a lot of senior executive communications training. You've got to get them beyond this garbage nonsense of eye contact and body language. You've got to get them to the kind of deep magic that I've been describing. So that's what we do. Tons of fun. We love it. Love our clients. They seem to love us. So that's kind of the story.
As far as delivery, that component is so important. And there are so many things, as you're mentioning, so many things can happen on that game day, on that delivery day. Mm-hmm. Some things are good, some things are bad. They're all challenging, but in Mastering the Moment, it's exciting how you go through all the details and you bring up the things that can happen, and then also how to handle that and have a great delivery with your big ideas that we started with the Compelling Communicator.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the book is broken into three macro sections: how to prepare, And that's kind of block and tackle, admittedly, but I've had so much feedback on that's so obvious, but I never do it. So, for example, it doesn't matter how good you are in trouble if the room's 75 degrees with no natural lighting. Now, can you fix that? Yeah, absolutely you can. Rooms have thermostats. Rarely can that not be fixed. But there's no way you fix that if you walk in 5 minutes before your presentation is due to start. But that's what 99% of people do. And if just one of the most simple rules is, especially if it's a high-stakes thing, get there an hour early. Change the layout. Make sure the sight lines are good. No, bright windows behind the speaker. Check the technology is going to work. Get the temperature down. Stop them leaf blowing outside if it's a hotel. There's literally a dozen things, at least, that are pivotal to your success that can only be fixed if you give yourself a little bit of time. In fact, you may have noticed, or you will notice, there are some checklists in the back of the book. So once you read the book, there's a lot in there, but then there's these great checklists in the back of the book, like get there, is the temperature right, are they leaf blowing outside? You've got a lot more control than you think you do. A lot of people just think the venue, the place is what it is. Like, no, you've got a ton of control over it, but you don't have that control if you don't exercise it. Then the second piece of the book is then, okay, what do you do? That is everything that happens from the moment you stand up. So the mechanics of presenting, if you like, there's some really vital teaching there around how to master your opening. It's this really interesting moment, right, when an audience is very highly sensitive or sensitized to what you're doing, so they want to know if their time's being wasted. So they're very sensitive early on to, is this going to be a good use of my time? But that is the moment when your brain is most likely to turn to mush. So you've got a collision of two interesting forces. So there's a very interesting chapter there on how to conquer, if you like, your opening. Talk there about communication mechanics, big topics there. Time management, kind of obvious, but almost all speakers mess that one up. And then there's a really powerful, important chapter on managing the audience. I mean, really no presentation is a presentation. Every presentation to some degree is a conversation. And you can have that conversation be rich, meaningful, additive. People feel they got a lot out of it, or that thing can just go completely out of control. Some blowhard grabs the mic, as it were, takes you off into a briar patch. If you don't know how to respectfully and sometimes, in fact, forcefully pull that back on track, you're going to lose it. So there's some really powerful chapters there, I think, at least. And then the final section goes up a level. It's odd how this book elevates as it progresses. Is, okay, you think we're done, right, how to prepare and what to do, but the final section is who to be. And what I mean by that is there are certain aspects of persona that really influence an audience. Do you come across as credible, believable, trustworthy, authentic, or do you come across as fake, shallow, untrustworthy? And so that final section does something very unusual. What it seeks to do is correlate the different variables of style with stylistic effectiveness. What I mean by stylistic effectiveness is generating that sense of trustworthiness, credibility. And we actually conclude that there are three things that really drive a heightened sense of trustworthiness and credibility in an audience, which could not be more important, and especially so in the corporate life and particularly in sales. Ultimately, customers buy solutions. Good solutions messaging is a huge part of getting deals done. But at some level, there's also the trustworthiness and credibility of the salesperson. A lot of salespeople are outgoing and they know how to talk, but that is not the same as saying they really articulate an argument well and develop what I would call a strong executive presence. Most salespeople need training in that. So anyway, so that's kind of the structure of the book. Covers a whole bunch of interesting topics.
Well, let's tell people the target audience for this. You mentioned sales. Certainly, as we're talking about presentations, we know that someone that's going to do a presentation, with whether they do many per year or just a few, what you're covering in Mastering the Moment helps them with that presentation and takes it beyond many levels that people don't even think about. But you also mentioned sales, and whether we're in a presentation or if we're one-on-one or if we're in a small group, some of the things that you're talking about here are also important there. But let's tell people your intent when you thought about who this book is going to be for and who it's going to help the most.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's sort of a really ironic answer to that question, truthfully. At the core, this book, in fact, both books, were built for the organizational individual. A lot of individuals make presentations, infrequently or more frequently, but they're often very important. You've got the divisional general manager coming in from Germany, and you're going to make a presentation pitching a project or a budget. You really want that to be a thing of beauty. You want that to be astonishing. You want that individual to go, A, I'm going to fund that, and B, I'm going to keep my eye on that guy, Bill, because that was exceptional communication. So anyone in an organizational setting, and as you said, it might be infrequent. You might only have 2 or 3 of those a year, but boy, they become important. Most people have more than that. They're making more presentations than that. And then, as you said, as you narrow if you think about sort of narrowing the focus on the binoculars, if you like, you really do see an important application here in sales. If you don't build good sales messaging and then deliver it well, you're going to have problems. I can't tell you who, but we're working with one of the top 3, several of the top 10 technology companies in the world. And recently I saw some data yesterday that for one of their core solutions, the solution really they're known for, and this is a Dow 30 company, they've taken their sales conversion rate from about 23% to about 53%, purely by fixing the messaging. And that's a wonderful testimony, and not, by the way, in the least unusual for us, of how important it is to get that commercial messaging right. But the irony I reference is this. That's what fundamentally we exist to do. We work with corporations. We're working on executive and commercial messaging. You would be astonished, Bill, how many emails I have. I had a conversation with someone, again at a major corporation, who said after taking the class, literally, funny enough, they told me this the next day. We were doing a 2-day program and came back on the second day, and he came up to me the morning of the second day and said, I got to tell you something. And he got really quite emotional. And I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen. Like, what's the problem? And he said, thanks to what I learned yesterday, I went home and I had the first meaningful conversation I've had with my teenage daughter in 2 years. And in fact, he then wrote to the head of HR of his company, basically making the same point or explaining the same thing. And we've had a surprising number of people give us that kind of feedback. So this is the ironic second piece, which is a human brain is a human brain, and the communication principles I'm teaching here are relevant in arguably any setting when you're communicating with another human being, not just a commercial setting, but talking to a teenage son about not texting and driving. We do a lot of work training pastors in sermon design, a lot of work with nonprofits designing messaging for donor messaging, helping them raise funds. We do a lot of work with startups, helping startups not only message their solutions more effectively in the market, but also the investor community, something, again, they typically get wrong. So there's this kind of narrow, wide angle, the narrow focus of the commercial conversation is what we're all about. But then there's this big wide angle of any communication. One guy told us he used our methodology to help him persuade get the grammar right here, his girlfriend's reluctant family to let him marry her. And they're now happily married, so good for him. So it's interesting. So communication kind of is everywhere. If you can get better at it, it will always be beneficial to you.
There are always many applications for great communications. We're talking with Tim Pollard, author of Mastering the Moment and The Compelling Communicator. Tim, if someone wants to reach out to you for your services, let's tell them how they can do so.
Yeah, so the company's called Oratium, O-R-A-T-I-U-M. That's Latin for an oral argument. It's where we get the word orator and oratory from. Just on our website, there's a contact form. People can absolutely call me. Give you my cell phone number is 406-697-9898, and I'll happily chat about what we do, or somebody else will be able to. It's just very easy to contact us, and the website has some good other resources. That's obviously just oratium.com. So it's easy how they can get in touch with us.
Oratium.com. And also, as you mentioned, the people as far as pastors, helping them construct sermons and others. I'm also thinking about attorneys. I would think that would be a part as well, because Whether we're an attorney or not, when we think about good communication, we're making our case to somebody, whether it's an individual or a room full of people in that 75-degree room or with a leaf blower and all those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's the basics of life.
We have had several attorneys take our program. There are lots of different presentations that show up in their world, particularly, of course, litigating attorneys. I mean, a closing argument is, lives hinge on the quality of closing arguments. So almost in any sense, actually, I mean, if you're an accountant and or an optometrist or any professional, don't you try and recruit customers? Of course you do. If you're an accountant, you want families or businesses to be clients of yours. And what do you say? Hey, I'm a really great accountant. Well, okay, that's a message. It's not nearly as effective a message as it could be. So, yeah, as you said earlier, I mean, the application is incredibly broad. I was I like your show, and the whole idea of success in your life is broadly defined, and I really like that. Good communication is an absolutely integral part of success in life. People who communicate well, I mean, history's just proven this, will, as a rule, outperform people of equal talent who do not communicate as well, because they need to get their argument across. They need to persuade people. They need to get people. They want people to get on board with what they're doing or what they're recommending in almost any setting. And I get very passionate about what I do, because if you can master the skills and processes of communication, it really extends your ability in almost any sphere.
People, for them to remember your message, I know in the Compelling Communicator you discuss this quite a bit, but for people to remember what you say, to remember the big ideas that you construct and bring forth, give us a quick word, and there's the term stickiness that you use. Just basically one or two things. If we have something important and we're telling someone or group or even an individual, how do we get them to remember? How do we make that connection?
Oh, great question, and tough to answer that really briefly. But one of the things you want to shoot for in all communication, and this is, I think, is what you're referencing, is this concept of retellability,
yes,
or representability. And what I mean by that is the message has stuck so successfully. So imagine this. Imagine, Bill, I was chatting to you. We're setting up this nonprofit, and we need some funding, and I'm chatting to you about it. And let's imagine you go home later that day and, having dinner with your wife, and she was not in that first conversation. The real essence of great communication is not that it was good in the first conversation. It's that it's good in the second conversation, where I'm not even in the room, and you would say to your wife, well, it's really interesting. There's this guy I met, and they're really trying to tackle this problem in society, and here are the big ideas about how they're going to do that. So the goal you're always shooting for is, I would call, retellability. And by the way, there's nothing more important than that in the world of sales, because in any sales scenario, the decision gets made by a bunch of people in a room you don't get invited to. And what we do is we help companies build messaging that pass the second conversation test, the retellability test. So that's the idea of real stickiness. It has to kind of attach to the brain in a different way. And now you're starting to realize or see why eye contact and body language are so meaningless. It doesn't get you that. It just all the time you spend on this traditional thinking, it's completely wasted. What you want to do is really, it's very tough to boil this, but maybe two or three really big things. Number one, the way you really create stickiness is anchor the whole message in something the audience really cares about, and typically in a problem. So if I was selling you, this was an example from the first book, if I was selling you a lighting solution for a hospital, if I tell you all about the great lights and switches and sensors and blah, 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 you're not going to remember it. Imagine you're a hospital CEO. If I said to you, Bill, did you know that if lighting is bad, there can be as high as a 3.5 prescription dispensing error rate when a nurse reads a patient chart in a poorly lit room? Man, have I got your attention. Because and this is a true story. There's no real interest you have in lights and ballasts and switches and sensors, but you are really engaged when I talk about the way that poor lighting influences the outcomes you get at that hospital. And by the way, there are other issues: nursing productivity, brand perception. So the first thing you really want to do is anchor your message in the problem that you're solving. Because I have your absolute full attention if I'm talking about problems with clinical outcomes, nursing productivity, and customer satisfaction or patient satisfaction. So the first thing is that. The second thing I would say is you always want to boil your idea, your message, to a small number of big ideas. I don't have time to go into this, but the brain loves big ideas, operates at the level of big ideas. So somebody listening to this call, let me give you a classic example. Somebody listening to this call might tell someone else about it later and say, oh, I heard this radio interview this morning. It was kind of interesting. This guy was talking about something very interesting. He was talking about retellability. And you see, nobody listening to this is storing a recording, if you like, of this 25 minutes. What their brain is actually doing is boiling it, synthetically, synthesizing it to a small number of big ideas. And so you might go away and say, well, this was really interesting, to get messaging right, you've got to get design right and then delivery right. You really want to shoot for retellability, and you want to orient your message around a small number of ideas. So you see what that listener has done is they boiled the message to a small number of big ideas. So what you want to do as a communicator always is feed the brain the food it wants, which is big ideas. And that gets you away from decks of garbage bulleted PowerPoints and gets you much more to an ideas-driven narrative. So imagine if I said, Bill, your hospital is running productivity risks, brand risks, and clinical risks with bad lighting. Our solution can perfectly solve that. It's completely customized to your environment. It's not, off the shelf. And thirdly, just give you an example of a big idea, it is unbelievably good economically because the government is providing rebates for low-energy lighting, and we will, by the way, make it really easy because we'll take care of that paperwork. So I can boil what would have been 100 slides to, we absolutely know how to solve this problem. It's completely customized, so it's right for your environment. The economics are fabulous, and we make it really easy because we take care of the paperwork. So you see, I just essentially created, or re-articulated a four-part message. And that's what we teach companies to do, is to figure out what are the big ideas that get their customer to a decision. And if you notice, by the way, I was able to articulate that in probably 20 seconds. And people often ask, well, what is an elevator pitch? How do you build an elevator pitch? Well, an elevator pitch is simply a summary of your big ideas. That's a little bit of a whirlwind tour through the core content. But if you want to build great messaging, anchor in a customer problem or an audience problem, construct it around a small number of big ideas. And by the way, if there was a third one, I said there were three, there actually is a third one, is organize it into a logical narrative. If you think about it, the first big idea is never going to be, oh, we'll do the paperwork for you. Because you're like, what? That's completely out of context. But if I said we have a great solution, it's completely customized, it's incredible ROI, partly because of the economics and partly because the government will pay for it, and fourthly, we'll make it really easy because we'll do the paperwork for you. In context, that big idea makes perfect sense. It would make no sense out of context. The third big mistake almost everybody makes is they don't know how to structure their narrative so it has a logical sequence. So I think those are sort of the three big things. Now, again, you kind of need to read the book to get the fuller picture. But if you just went away and implemented those three things, it would make a pretty dramatic difference, I can tell you. Incredible
information, Tim. Let's tell people once again how they can reach out to you. We're talking with author Tim Pollard. The book is Mastering the Moment and The Compelling Communicator. Tim, how can they reach you?
So as I said, our website is oratium.com. ORATIUM, oratium.com, and there's a contact us form, like just to get the conversation started. That will come to us. Or people are welcome to call me if they want. My mobile is 406-697-9898. It's always fun talking to people who want to learn how to communicate better. For most people, just go to Amazon and buy the books is a wonderful place to start. But if people wanted to talk about, how would I bring this into a company, or what does the consulting process look like? If you're going to really try and fix your sales messaging, the better way to do that is probably through a consulting project rather than just reading the book. It's very hard to take just the words off the page and apply them, and we know so much about how to do that in a consulting setting. We always just love talking to people who want to get their communications right, so that's the way to do it.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Tim Pollard. You've been listening to Successful Living with Bill Knapik, and today with author Tim Pollard. The book is Mastering the Moment. Pick it up at Amazon or anywhere else where they sell books. And the compelling communicator. The latest book, though, is Mastering the Moment. Thank you so much, Tim, for being on the show.
Thank you, Bill. My pleasure. Great. Always fun talking to you.
His website is oratium.com, oratium.com. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.